John chapter 11 is where we're at this morning. So this coming week is what we in the church call Holy Week, is when we think about the events right before the death and resurrection of Jesus. If you know anything about the Christian faith, you know the stories of Palm Sunday and Good Friday and Easter Sunday. These historical events are critical to Christianity and our understanding of who God is. This morning I want us to back up just a little bit further in the story, back before Palm Sunday and the triumphal entry, to some of the events that happened right before that week. So if you look at John chapter 11, you'll see the story. It's the story of one family. It's a story about a man and his two sisters, Lazarus and Mary and Martha. And really the key to this story is found in John chapter 11, verses 25 and 26, and verse 42. They'll say, Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? And then verse 42, Jesus praying says, I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me. Many of us know the story of the death and raising of Lazarus, and we know the story of his sisters, Mary and Martha. Preachers and teachers approach the story from many different points of view. But this morning I want us to look at the reactions of the people towards Jesus. How did they act? How did they see Jesus? How did they react to this situation that was going on in their lives? What was their response? They have a good response, they have a bad response. That's what I want us to focus in on today as we look at this chapter, as we look at this story. And then we'll ask the questions of ourselves. How do we react to him in trials of life? What do we do? What do we think of Jesus when suffering and death come to our lives? What is our reaction? So we're going to ask those questions. But first, let us take a look at the text itself. And let's look at the reactions of these people here. First, we'll take a look at verses 1 through 16. This is the disciples here. Let's take a focus in on the reaction of the disciples and see how they reacted to Jesus. Starting in verse 1, it says, Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, This illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, Let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and are you going there again? Jesus answered, Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. After saying these things, he said to them, Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover. Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought that he meant rest and sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died. For your sake, I am glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. So Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, Let us also go, that we may die with him. The first reaction we see here is their statement, Rabbi. But Rabbi, right? They question Jesus' ability to grasp the situation, right? Jesus is saying, all right, okay, I got this message from Mary and Martha. We're going to go to Bethany, which is just right outside of Jerusalem. It'll be like a suburb of Jerusalem. And the disciples' immediate reactions like, whoa, Rabbi, wait a minute. Maybe you don't grasp the situation here. It wasn't too long ago, we were in Jerusalem, and these people wanted to stone you. Do you get that, Jesus? Maybe you don't understand what's happening here. Maybe you don't understand the gravity of the situation. We were just there, and they wanted to kill you. And now you want to go back? Let's put a pause here for a minute. Let's rethink this. And Jesus' response to them is classic because he says, are there not 12 hours in the day? Isn't this light? This is not catching me off guard here, guys. It's basically what he's saying. We walk in the light. I walk in the light. So I see what's happening. I understand. We don't walk in darkness. Those who walk in darkness stumble. They don't know where they're going. We know where I'm going. I know where I'm going. And so, that's his response back to them. But their response is, wait a minute, Jesus, maybe you don't understand what's happening here. This is not a good plan. You're going to die. That's what they're going to do. They're going to kill you. So that's their immediate response to Jesus. Wait a minute. Now think about this. They say rabbi, which means teacher. And then they tell him what to do. Does that make any sense? Like he's the teacher. He's the great rabbi. Oh, great, rabbi, teacher, wait, let me tell you what to do, is what they're doing here. Doesn't make any sense. They should have started off with something else, like, hey, Jesus, or hey, guy, you're going the wrong way. But to call him rabbi, teacher, and then go ahead and teach him, that's the response of the disciples right there. So you can kind of get where they're at this point in their walk, in their faith with him. And then Jesus talks about how they're going to stay a few more days, and then they're going to go, and then he's going to awaken him. And he tells them that he's sleeping. And so oftentimes in the Bible, Paul uses this quite often. It's a euphemism for those who are followers of Christ that have died. They've fallen asleep. And Jesus uses this phrase, and they think, well, if he's sleeping, he'll get better. That's what you need. When you're sick, you're not feeling well, you just need a good rest, and then he'll get better. And so the disciples here misunderstand what Jesus is talking about. They're not tracking with him. So first they say, well, wait a minute, this is not a good idea. Maybe Jesus doesn't understand the situation, so we need to explain it to him. And then they do the same thing again. They misunderstand. They don't understand what Jesus is talking about. And he has to be very blunt and very direct and says, no, he's dead. Okay? I'm trying to let you guys know what's going on here. He's died. And we have to go. And so the disciples are kind of confused. They don't really understand their place yet. They're misunderstanding the situation. They think Jesus doesn't know what's going on. Maybe he's missing something, and I need to let him know. Like, hey, remember that if we go to Jerusalem, even if we go to Bethany, which is just outside, we're looking at dying here. Maybe you just don't understand. But then we come to Thomas's remark. And I think Thomas has gotten a bad rap over all these years in the Christian church. You always call him Doubting Thomas. What a horrible thing to be called for all these years. Poor Thomas. I feel bad for the guy. Oh, the Doubting Thomas. And he was kind of like Peter, I think, in his demeanor. He's very blunt, very straightforward. Even after the resurrection, he's like, unless I see these things, hey, you guys can say all you want, but I want to see it for myself. And it's not that he was really doubting who Jesus was or that he was the Messiah or the Son of God. I don't think he was even doubting that the resurrection occurred. He just wanted to see it for himself. He was very blunt, very straightforward. He just wanted it, and he knew what he wanted, and he was going to go after it. And I think that's who Thomas is here. It's hard to tell because we don't have the Bible doesn't go into his emotional state. It doesn't explain his motives or why he said this. So we are kind of speculating on why he said it. But he says, let us also go that we may die with him. I don't think it's like, oh, let's go because we're going to die anyway. I don't think he said it like that. I think he's saying, if Jesus is going, and obviously we're not going to change his plans. We can't, like the Bible says, he's set like a flint to go to Jerusalem. He's going that way. Then we should also go with him. If he's going to go there and die, then we're going to go die with him. And that's where Thomas is at. We can't change Jesus' mind. We can try to tell him, we can try to warn him, try to explain things better to Jesus as if he needed more of an explanation of what's going on. but we should just go. And if death awaits him, then we should go and die with him too. So that's Thomas's response. So you get kind of a varied response here from the disciples, kind of asking several different questions. So the disciples, they follow Jesus, and they head towards Bethany. And then we pick up the story again in verse 17, which says, "Now when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, but Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, 'Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you.' Jesus said to her, 'Your brother will rise again.' Martha said to him, 'I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day.' Jesus said to her, 'I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this?' She said to him, 'Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who's coming into the world.' When Jesus had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, 'The teacher is here and is calling for you.' When she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, 'Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died.'" So let's stop there and think about Mary and Martha's response real quick here. How did they respond? What was the thing that they both said? "Jesus, if you would have been here," right? That's what they both said. If you would have been here, everything would have been different. If you would have been here, things would have been, if you would have been here just present with us, then this wouldn't have happened. They both felt that way. That if Jesus would have been, we wrote you a message, Jesus, right? We sent you the message that, your loved one is ill. Come. And we sent that, and you didn't come right away. If you would have been here, all this would have been different. But Martha says, when Jesus asks her, "Do you believe? Do you believe I am the resurrection and life? Do you believe these things I've been teaching?" What does Martha say? "I believe." Jesus says, he doesn't say, "Well, no, you don't. You don't understand." He says, he doesn't, correct her. I think she actually does believe. See, I don't think they doubt who Jesus is. I don't think they doubt his power. But I think they're questioning why he did what he did. He delayed himself. He could have come. He could have been there. But he didn't. He wasn't there for them when they thought they needed him. That's what they're thinking. Where was Jesus? Why didn't he come right away? If you were just here, everything would have been different. Why are you putting us through this grief? Why the suffering? Why weren't you here for us when we needed you? I think that's what they're asking. Because what does Martha say? She confesses, right? She confesses that he is the Messiah, the Son of God. Where were you? We needed you. You weren't here. That's their response. Now, along with Mary and Martha, there's some other people there. There's all the people from Jerusalem that went out, all the Jewish people that went out to mourn the death of Lazarus. They were there mourning with Mary and Martha. They had all gathered together. That was often the custom. Sometimes if you didn't have enough people, you would hire people to come out and mourn. You would hire professional mourners. which is something we don't have today, which is kind of weird in our culture to think about, but that's what they would do. You'd have a bunch of people come out and they just sit there and wail and mourn, and that's what their job was. And so here this group of Jewish people are there with the sisters, mourning the death of their brother. And in verse 36 and 37, we get their response to what's happening. And verse 36 says, "So the Jews said, 'See how he loved him.'" I should back up a second, because what just happened before that is that Jesus talked to them. He asked where they laid Lazarus, and they say, "Come and see." And then it has Jesus wept. So Jesus is weeping. And so the Jews then respond, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying?" So you got two responses here, right? The first part, the part of the Jews, they believed. They said, "See how he loved him." They believed that Jesus loved Lazarus. And they believed that Jesus loved Mary and Martha too. But see how he loved him. Look at, he's crying. Look at that. Look at the response of Jesus. He's torn up about this whole thing. He must have loved him because of his reaction. And the other people are like, no. If he really truly loved him, he would have been here. He could have kept him from dying. Couldn't he have done that? If he can, open the eyes of the blind man, couldn't he have stopped this guy from dying? If he really loved him, he would have been here and stopped him from doing that. He would still be alive. That's how he shows how he loved him. But the other people are like, no, look, he's crying. He really did love him. So you got these two responses right here amongst the people. The first saw the response and looked at that and said, well, there's the proof that he loved them. And the other people were looking at the fact that he's dead and said, well, look, no, he didn't love him. He let him die. If he really loved him, he would have listened to Mary and Martha and did what they asked. So we'll get back to those people in a minute. But let's look at the next person in the story. Who's the next person that shows up in the story? It's Lazarus. Lazarus himself. Let's look at that here in verses 38 through 44. It says, "Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, 'Take away the stone.' Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, 'Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead 4 days.' Jesus said to her, 'Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?' So they took away the stone. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, 'Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me.' When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, 'Lazarus, come out!' The man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips and his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, 'Unbind him and let him go.'" Let's think about the response of Lazarus here. How did Lazarus respond to Jesus? Now that would be a ridiculous question, right? If we're talking about anyone else. Because if you go out to the graveyard today, no matter what people tell you or whatever crazy churches are doing, if you go out to the graveyard today and say, so-and-so, come on out, it's not going to happen, right? You're not going to have a little hand shoot out, and it's not going to happen. But with Jesus, what does Lazarus do? He doesn't poke his head out, I don't think so, I just want to stay dead. Or like, I didn't choose to come out. Why? I'm going to go back because I didn't choose this, Jesus. What does Lazarus do? Stands up, walks out, right? He's got the linen strips wrapped around him. He's got the shroud over his head still. He's stumbling to come out of the tomb. He responds the way he ought to respond, and that is to come right out and follow Jesus. It's an amazing thing to think about. That Lazarus didn't have, there was no debate. I mean, we often joke around sometimes about the fact that, Lazarus got the short end of the deal there. I mean, he would have been in paradise, loving it, and then all of a sudden now he's back on this stinky earth and having to put up with other people. And not too long later, the Jewish people would want to kill him too. And so, hey, come on back to earth where you get to die again and then have all these people want to kill you. So, but Lazarus didn't say, well, that's not, I'd rather pass on that, Jesus. I'd rather just stay in paradise and not to follow you. When Jesus calls, the man came alive and he came out. That's Lazarus' response. Then we come back to the Jews in 45 and 46. So here's the same group of people that were there. And it says that many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and seen what he did, believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Interesting, huh? The first group of people, they believed in who Jesus was. That's what he'd been saying, right? He said that to the disciples. He said that to the people while they're standing there listening to him pray to the Father. I'm doing this so that they might believe that you sent me. I'm doing this so that they'll believe. And what happened? Some of them believed, right? They're like, wow, he is the Messiah. He is the Christ, the Son of God who has come into the world. Just like Martha was saying. They believed what Martha believed. He raised Lazarus from the dead. He's able to do this. He's showing us that he is the Messiah. We believe in him. They were right. He did love him. And he was able to keep him from dying because he was the resurrection. He raised him from the dead. But in that group of Jewish people, that wasn't the only response. There's some people that went to the Pharisees. And they tell on him to really get him in trouble. The interesting thing is they don't doubt the miracle, do they? You don't see that there. They don't say, well, that didn't happen. That Lazarus is still dead. They didn't say that. They didn't say, well, I was just hallucinating, and we were all hallucinating, and Lazarus didn't really come out. He's still in the grave. Because they could go back and check the grave, right? They could go up and touch Lazarus and, hey, put your hands around him and give him a hug. And he wasn't smelly from death anymore, and he was alive. So they didn't doubt the miracle. They didn't doubt that Lazarus was alive and well. That makes me wonder, what were they thinking when they were running on the way to the Pharisees? Because they saw Jesus do that, and they're like, oh, we got to go tell on him. He's raising people from the dead. Are you serious? The Pharisees want to get him. Now they got them. They got their proof. Let's go run and tell on him. And so they're basically tattletales, and they're tattling on Jesus. Not a great way to be inscripturated for all time. Is you're the ones that went and tattled on him, raising Lazarus from the dead. That's exactly what they're doing here. They know that the Pharisees and the council wanted to get Jesus, and they see him raising people from the dead, and they've had enough. They're gonna go tell, hey, he's out in Bethany. Here's what's going on. So they don't doubt the miracle happened. They're just not following Christ. And then we get the response of the Pharisees and the Sanhedrin. That's in verses 47 and 48, and then 57 too. So here's what it says. So the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered the council and said, what are we to do? For this man performs many signs. If you let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. Continue on, it says, but one of them, Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, said to them, you know nothing at all, nor do you understand that it's better for you that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish. And if we skip down to verse 57, it says, now the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that if anyone knew where he was, he should let them know so that they might arrest him. So what's the response of the Pharisees and the Sanhedrin all together? What was their response? This guy's got to die. That's it. And he's raising people from the dead. And it's just right outside of Jerusalem here. If he keeps doing this, everyone's going to believe in him. So he has to die. There's no choice now. We can't try to trap him in, word games like we were doing before. We can't, hopefully catch him alone. This is it. We've got to end this now. And so this is where they're at. This is the response to Christ. It would be better for him to be out of our lives than for him to stay alive here. We'd be better off without him. It's better for him to die than the whole nation to be destroyed. For us to lose our place of power here, it's better for him just to go. And so this is their response to Jesus. So that brings us to us. Where do we find ourselves in this story? Which group of people do we find ourselves identifying with? How have we responded to him? Hopefully you're not like the Pharisees and the Sanhedrin. Hopefully you're not saying, well, Jesus has no place in my life. It'd be better off. My life would be better off without him. I don't want to hear anything about Jesus. I don't want to hear anything about the Bible. I don't want to hear anything about religion at all. Everything would just be better if it was all gone. A lot of people say that, don't they? A lot of people, that's their response. I don't want to hear this. You can talk about anything else. They'll talk to you all day about politics, about the weather. But if you mention Jesus, I'd be better off without him in my life. I'd be better off if you don't even say anything about him. I don't want to hear anything about him. Hopefully we don't find ourselves in that place this morning, that Jesus or my life would be better off without him in it. It's a scary place to be if that's your response. The Pharisees and Sanhedrin are the ones that executed Christ. They followed through with their response. They were successful in removing his physical body from them, but they didn't realize that what Caiaphas says was a prophecy, that was better for one man to die than the whole nation to perish. He died and the nation was given life through the death and resurrection of Christ. It's the same for us. If we know Christ, then we can have eternal life. It's the exact opposite. Our response should be the exact opposite of what the Pharisees and the Sanhedrin said. My life is not better without him. I don't have life unless I have him. I need him. He is the resurrection. He is the life. There is no life outside of him. The life you live now without him is not a life at all. And actually, you're a walking dead person, really. And the end is eternal destruction. That's all that awaits. There is no happiness afterwards. There is no, you'll be in a better place afterwards. There's this eternal death, eternal separation from all that is good, all that is holy, eternal separation from God himself. So I pray that that's not our response. I pray that that's not where our hearts are at. I pray that it is that we need Jesus, that all we have is Christ. But even if we are followers of Christ, even if we do believe, sometimes we struggle. Sometimes we find ourselves identifying with these other people here. Like the disciples, sometimes we find ourselves in their place. You know Jesus, you know who he is and what he stands for, but maybe you've misunderstood his plans, or maybe you wonder if he really knows what's going on. Sometimes, I think we say that, maybe not in those exact words, but sometimes we feel that, like maybe God just doesn't know what's happening here. Maybe he doesn't know the suffering that I'm going through. Maybe he doesn't understand the trial that I'm going through. If he just knew what was going on, he would change things. He wouldn't do what he was doing. Maybe I just need to let him know, like, hey, God, do you know what's happening to me? Maybe I just need to explain it to him, and then he'll change what he's doing. Maybe I can convince him not to do what he's doing. Maybe I can convince him to go a different way. Sometimes we find ourselves doing that. We bargain with God. Well, Rabbi, you don't know what's happening here. You don't know what that's going to lead to. I do. I know what that's going to do, and I don't want to go there. And so you better change your plans. You better, adjust your plan, God, to my plan so it works out the way I want it to. Oftentimes, that's how we find ourselves, just like the disciples. Like, Rabbi, no, you don't want to go to Bethany. We shouldn't go there. That's sometimes where we find ourselves, telling Jesus, no, I don't want to go there. Pick plan B, Jesus. Pick something else, but not that. Sometimes we find ourselves like Mary and Martha and the Jews. If you really cared for me, you would be putting me through all this grief or pain. You could have prevented all this. Why didn't you prevent this? Why didn't you stop this? Why are you putting me through this? I know a lot of people are saying that today. The coronavirus going on and all the upset and upheaval, people, those have lost their jobs. God, why are you putting me through this? If you really love me, would you put me through these trials? Would you put me through all these cares? Would you put me through all this stress? And I don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow. Why would you put me through this? That's the response of Mary and Martha. Like, I know that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. I know who you are. I trust in you. And you can stop these things. I know it. You can ask whatever you want from the Father, and he'll give it to you. So why am I going through all this suffering? Why am I going through this grief and this pain? Those are questions we find ourselves asking sometimes, just like Mary and Martha. You could have prevented this. Why didn't you? Hopefully we find ourselves more and more kind of like Thomas and like Lazarus and like the believing Jews in that group. Hopefully we can find ourselves more and more identifying with these people. See, like Thomas didn't fully understand what was going on. He didn't know. I mean, obviously Jesus told him several times, like, hey, I have to go to Jerusalem and they're going to kill the Son of Man and I'll rise from the dead. But they weren't really grasping it yet. They didn't really have a hold of it yet. But he was willing to go and to encourage the others, let us all go. He said, and he didn't say, well, I'm going to follow Jesus and you guys can do whatever you want. He said, let us all go. Let us go. Let us follow Jesus. Let's go and die with him. See, oftentimes we don't know where God's leading us. We don't, the providence of God is often cloudy. We can't see ahead. But we need to be more like Thomas and just resolute about, hey, wherever you're leading me, wherever you're taking me on this road, I'm going to go with you. I'll go and die with you, Jesus. I'll follow you. I'll go to Bethany. I'll go wherever you want me to go, even if it means certain death. I'll follow you. I'll follow you anyway. If we're believers in Christ, then we're a lot like Lazarus. Lazarus' response, he was dead, right? Here at Lakeview, we just went through Ephesians chapter 2 not too long ago. We said that we were all dead in our trespasses and sins. But what? He made us alive, right? Here we go. Jesus was teaching that right here. Why did he let Lazarus die? So that the people might believe. So that they would understand their situation that they were in. They needed to see that they were all in the tomb. They were all smelling like death. It wasn't just Lazarus in the tomb. Mary and Martha and all the Jews that were there, they were all in the tomb as well. They didn't see that, but they were all spiritually dead. They were all gone. They were all dying right before their eyes. But as soon as Jesus spoke, boom, Lazarus was alive. And that's what he does for all believers. One day, you were just doing what you do, living in your sin, not really, some of us were different stages of, religiousness too, Maybe you're reading your Bible and all that kind of stuff, going to church all the time. But one day, Jesus spoke, and he changed you, and you're never the same again. You were dead in your trespasses and sins, and he made you alive. Just like Lazarus. Lazarus didn't have a choice. Jesus didn't say, well, Lazarus, you think you want to come out? Or no, he's the good shepherd. When he calls, his sheep follow him. That's what they do. That's what we need to do. And we need to be like those believing Jews. When we see the power of Jesus, we'll believe. We'll believe. We don't need anything else. That was it. Those Jews are like, well, that was a great raising Lazarus from the dead, but can you give us some more stuff here? We want to see something else. No, they trusted him. They believed. They were added to the disciples that day. So my prayer is that we're like that. Oftentimes we'll find ourselves slipping back to the Mary and Martha and asking God why, and we'll be like the disciples and try to tell God what he should do. You need to do this and that. But we need to be like Thomas and Lazarus and the Jews and say, you've done everything. There's nothing else left to be done. I just need to follow you. I can trust you. It's not, if you would have been here, things would have been different. You're here, and things are different. So on this Palm Sunday, let's think about that triumphant entry when he came in. Lazarus had been raised. He's alive. It's been interesting. I don't know, because Bethany was not too far out. Maybe Mary, Martha, and Lazarus might have been in that crowd as they came in. It says the disciples, they were definitely there. That would have been interesting if they would have been there, waving, the one that Jesus raised from the dead could have been there celebrating the king coming into his kingdom. An interesting thought, isn't it? To think about what Lazarus meant. Well, Lazarus had a great response. He came out, and the people wanted to kill him too. And so we see that's the warning for all of us. There's challenges ahead for us. That's for sure. There's challenges for us as the church worldwide. We don't know what anything will look like on the other side, but we can be like Thomas and say, hey, if that's where Jesus is going, I'm going too.
What a day for a celebration. Oh, what a day for a new sunrise. Oh, what a day for a resurrection. 'Cause he gave us his life. God is our greatest prize. Our greatest